When did a dumb rule almost unalive someone? Our school had zero tolerance for running in hallways after a kid got trampled during a fire drill. The scholarship I'd won required maintaining perfect disciplinary standing. Without this scholarship, I wasn't going to college. I'd become an expert at speedwalking. That awkward almost jog that looked ridiculous but technically wasn't running. The security guards were obsessed with catching runners. They'd review footage every day and hand out punishments like candy. A kid lost his scholarship last year for running to the bathroom when he had food poisoning. After that, we all knew there were no exceptions. I kept a timer on my phone for passing periods, giving myself exactly enough time to walk between classes without rushing. I'd memorized which hallways got congested and planned routes that avoided them. My friend Ted would text me if there were guards stationed at certain corners, and I'd go the long way around. We all looked out for each other because we knew one moment of forgetting the rule meant losing our futures. The principal loved to remind us during assemblies that the no running policy had reduced hallway injuries by 40%. Mr. Elster would show these graphs about safety statistics, while kids in the audience were calculating whether they could afford community college if they lost their scholarship. He'd always end with "walking saves lives," which became this bitter joke among scholarship kids. During sixth period on a Thursday, I was in the library when I heard a weird thud from the hallway. Through the glass doors, I could see Mr. Garrett, the history teacher, on the floor clutching his chest. His face was purple and he wasn't moving right, just twitching. A couple freshmen were standing there frozen, not knowing what to do. One girl was crying and the other was just backing away like Mr. Garrett might explode. I knew the defibrillator was in the main office 3 hallways away. The nurse was at the elementary school that day, which she was every Thursday. The librarian was helping someone in the back. It was just me and these terrified kids and a teacher who was clearly having a heart attack. I could see the veins in Mr. Garrett's neck bulging, his eyes rolling back in his head. I started power walking toward the office, but Mr. Garrett made this gasping sound that meant he wasn't getting air. Every second mattered with cardiac arrest. 4 minutes without oxygen meant brain damage. 6 minutes meant death. The office was at least 2 minutes away at walking speed, and that wasn't counting the time to get back with the defibrillator. Mr. Garrett didn't have 4 minutes. He probably didn't even have 2. I thought about my scholarship for exactly 1 second, then started running faster than I'd ever run in my life. My sneakers squeaked on the linoleum as I skidded around corners. I slammed into a trash can, sending it flying, but didn't stop. I could see cameras everywhere. Those little red lights that meant my future was evaporating with every step. Other kids pressed against the walls as I flew past, some of them gasping because they knew what running meant for me. One kid actually yelled, "Your scholarship," but I was already gone. I grabbed the defibrillator from the office wall, the secretary yelling questions I didn't answer, and sprinted back even faster. My lungs were burning and I could taste blood in my throat from running so hard. By the time I got to Mr. Garrett, he wasn't breathing at all. His lips were blue and one of the freshmen was screaming that he was dead. I ripped his shirt open, buttons flying everywhere, placed the pads like we'd learned in health class, and let the machine analyze his heart rhythm. It shocked him twice before he started breathing again, just as the actual paramedics arrived. They said the defibrillator saved his life, that another minute without it would have been too late. Mr. Garrett's wife cried and hugged me at the hospital, saying I was an angel. The local news wanted to interview me about being a hero. I couldn't tell them that saving his life had cost me everything. Monday morning, Mr. Elster called me to his office. The security footage was playing on his computer, showing me running through 3 different hallways at full sprint. He paused it right where I was grabbing the defibrillator. "Mr. Garrett is alive because of you," Mr. Elster said, folding his hands on his desk. "His family wants to thank you personally at the school board meeting tonight." He pulled out a familiar form from his drawer, the one I'd signed freshman year about maintaining perfect disciplinary standing. "Of course, you understand that running on school property is an automatic infraction, regardless of circumstances. The scholarship committee will need to be notified this afternoon." My whole body went cold as he slid the paper across his desk toward me. The form had my signature at the bottom from 3 years ago when I was just a freshman who thought following rules would get me through life. Mr. Elster clicked his laptop shut and the sound made me jump in my chair. My hands were shaking so bad I had to sit on them to make them stop. The scholarship committee would meet in 3 days, and without that money, there was no way I could go to the state university I'd already sent my deposit to. I grabbed my backpack and stood up, even though my legs felt like jelly. Mr. Lower was already typing something on his computer and didn't look up when I walked out. Ted was waiting right outside the office door and his face went white when he saw me. I told him everything while we walked to the parking lot, keeping our pace slow like always, even though I wanted to run screaming from the building. He pulled out his phone and started texting everyone he knew who had scholarship, asking if anyone knew about appeals or exceptions or anything that might help. By the time we got to his car, he'd already gotten 3 responses saying nobody had ever successfully fought a scholarship revocation. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table with my parents while we spread out bank statements and loan applications and college brochures. Mom had her calculator out and kept punching in numbers that never added up to enough. Dad kept rubbing his eyes and saying maybe I could do 2 years at community college while working full-time at his friend's warehouse. We'd still need loans after that, just for the last 2 years at a state school. Mom started crying when she saw the total amount we'd need to borrow. I couldn't eat dinner and went to my room where I lay on my bed staring at ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Garrett's purple face and heard that gasping sound he made. Part of me wished I'd just walked to get the defibrillator, but then I'd see his wife at the hospital thanking me with tears running down her face. I knew I made the right choice, but that didn't make losing my future hurt any less. Sleep wouldn't come no matter how many times I flipped my pillow to the cool side. The next morning, I got to the school an hour early and went straight to the guidance office. Delaney Rose was already there with a stack of papers on her desk and a legal pad full of notes. She'd heard about what happened and had been researching appeal procedures since she got to the school. She pushed her glasses up and showed me a section in the scholarship handbook that nobody ever read. There was a whole appeals process I could use, including the right to present witness statements and documentation to support my case. She said she'd already cleared her schedule for the next 3 days to help me prepare everything. She even offered to come to the hearing with me as my advisor, which the rules apparently allowed. During lunch, I was walking to the library when I ran into Mr. Garrett's substitute teacher in the hallway. She stopped me and said he was recovering well at home, but wouldn't be back for at least a month. The whole history department department was talking about what I did, and most of them thought the punishment was ridiculous. She squeezed my shoulder before walking away. After school, I went to the main office to get copies of everything related to the incident. The secretary looked at me strange when I asked for the incident report and the AED log that showed the exact timeline of events. She printed everything without saying a word, but I saw her shake her head as she handed me the papers. The AED log showed I'd used it within 3 minutes of Mr. Garrett's collapse, which the paramedics said was the difference between life and death. That evening, I was doing homework when the phone rang and my mom called me downstairs. It was Ricky Dixon, the lead security guard who reviewed all the hallway footage. He said he couldn't officially say anything, but wanted me to know that several guards thought the rule needed exceptions for emergencies. He wished me luck with the appeal and said Mr. Garrett was a good man who didn't deserve to die because of a stupid policy. After he hung up, I sat there holding the phone and feeling less alone than I had since Monday. Ted showed up at my house an hour later with his laptop and a notebook full of research. We sat at my kitchen table and started building a timeline document with every detail we could remember from that Thursday. He'd found 3 other cases where students got in trouble for running during emergencies, including one kid who ran to get an inhaler for someone having an asthma attack. None of them had lost scholarship though, which made my case special in the worst way. Ted kept saying we'd figure something out, but I could see in his eyes he was as scared as I was. Friday morning, my phone buzzed while I was eating cereal, and the email notification made my stomach drop. Irene Holmes from the scholarship committee sent the official notice with all this formal language about potential revocation and how I had the right to present my case at a hearing on Tuesday at 4:00 in the afternoon. I wonder what's really going through Mr. Lobster's mind as he slides that paper across his desk talking about rules while knowing this kid just saved a life. Something about how calm he seems while destroying someone's future makes me curious about what kind of person sits behind that desk every day. Typing away after ruining a student's dream. The email said I could bring one support person and needed to submit any documents by Monday morning. My hands shook as I forwarded it to Delaney, who replied within 2 minutes saying she cleared her whole weekend to help me prepare. Saturday morning, she showed up at my house with a laptop, a legal pad, and this huge binder of appeal cases she'd researched. We sat at my dining room table for 6 hours straight, writing out exactly what happened minute by minute with no extra words or emotions. She kept making me practice reading it out loud, timing each section, and told me it was okay if my voice cracked a little because it showed I was human. Sunday, we did the same thing, going over every possible question they might ask with her pretending to be different committee members. She made me practice explaining the timeline of Mr. R's collapse over and over until I could say it without my hands shaking too much. My phone rang Sunday night and it was someone from the local paper, Maya Schmidt, who'd heard about the whole thing from a parent at the school board meeting. She wanted to interview me about saving Mr. Garrett and the scholarship situation, but my parents and I talked it over and decided to wait until after the hearing since we didn't know how the committee would react to media attention. Monday morning felt different at the school because word had gotten around about my hearing the next day. My English teacher pulled me aside between classes and whispered that she thought what I did was brave and offered to write a character reference letter if it would help. The math teacher nodded at me in the hallway, which was weird because he never acknowledged students, and even the lunch lady gave me an extra scoop of mashed potatoes without me asking. After school, I drove to Mr. Garrett's house with a large coffee from his favorite place near campus, the one with the fancy beans he always talked about during class. He answered the door looking pale and thin, but his eyes lit up when he saw me standing there with the coffee. He invited me into his living room where he had papers spread all over the coffee table, and before I could even sit down, he said he'd already written a statement for my hearing and would come testify in person if his doctor would let him. His wife came in from the kitchen and her eyes filled with tears the second she saw me. She grabbed my hands and kept saying thank you over and over, telling me the doctors at the hospital said one more minute without the defibrillator would have caused permanent brain damage or worse. She insisted on writing her own letter to the committee about how I gave her husband back to her and their 3 kids still had their dad because of what I did. Tuesday morning came too fast and everyone at the school knew about my hearing that afternoon. Kids I'd never talked to before stopped me in the hallway to say they were pulling for me, while others looked at the floor when I walked by like they didn't know what to say. Some freshman girl actually gave me a homemade good luck card, which was sweet but made me more nervous. During my free period, I met with Delaney one last time in her office to go over everything we'd prepared. She made me do breathing exercises when my voice started shaking and reminded me to stick to the fact we practiced, but also said it was okay to show real emotion because I'd saved someone's life and that mattered more than any scholarship. She kept repeating that I did the right thing and no matter what happened in the hearing, Mr. Garrett was alive because of my choice. At lunch, Ted had gathered about 15 scholarship kids in the back corner of the cafeteria and they were all sharing stories about close calls with a running rule. One girl admitted she saw a freshman pass out near the gym last year but walked to get help instead of running because she couldn't risk her scholarship. And by the time she got back, the kid had a concussion from hitting his head on the floor. Another guy said he watched a kid have a seizure during art class and everyone just stood there frozen, afraid to run for the nurse until a teacher finally showed up. Everyone kept looking at me like I was some kind of hero, but really, I just did what anyone should have been able to do without losing their future. At 3:15, I met my mom in the parking lot because she'd taken off work to come with me as my support person. She dressed up in her interview clothes and kept fixing my collar even though it was already straight. The drive to the district office felt like it took forever and also went too fast at the same time. We got there at 3:30 and the waiting room had these uncomfortable plastic chairs and fluorescent lights that made everything look sick. I pulled out my notes to review them one more time, even though I had every word memorized by now. My mom held my hand while we waited and I could feel her pulse racing as fast as mine. Other people came and went from different offices, but time seemed to stop while we sat there waiting for them to call my name. At 4:15, a door opened and a woman with gray hair and a clipboard called my name. So we stood up and followed her down a long hallway with pictures of past school board members on the walls. The hearing room had this big wooden table where 5 people sat with folders and laptops in front of them, and there were 2 chairs facing them where Mom and I sat down. Irene Holmes sat in the middle wearing a navy suit and glasses on a chain around her neck, shuffling papers, while the other other committee members looked at their notes. She started explaining how the hearing would work, that Mr. Elster would present the school's position first. Then I'd have my chance to speak, and they'd ask questions before making their decision. One woman on the end with curly red hair gave me this small nod like she was trying to tell me it would be okay, but the man next to her kept frowning at his laptop screen. Mr. Elster walked in carrying a laptop and a stack of papers, setting everything up at a small table to the side while the committee waited. He opened his laptop and connected it to the projector on the wall, then pulled up the security footage from that Thursday. The video showed me running through the hallways at full speed, my arms pumping and feet barely touching the ground as I flew around corners. He paused it at different points to show how I knocked over the trash can, slammed through a door, and grabbed the defibrillator from the wall. He explained the zero-tolerance policy had been in place for 3 years after the trampling incident, that every student signed an agreement about it, and that making exceptions would open the door for everyone to claim emergencies. He admitted I saved Mr. Garrett's life but said rules couldn't bend based on outcomes or the whole system would fall apart. When he finished and sat down, Irene nodded at me to begin. I stood up with my folder of documents, my hands shaking a little as I walked to the front. I started from the beginning, describing how I heard the thud and saw Mr. Garrett on the floor through the library doors. I explained his face was purple and he was twitching, that the freshmen were frozen and crying, and that I knew the nurse was at the elementary school like she always was. On Thursdays, I showed them my phone with a timer app I used for passing periods, explaining how I'd calculated it would take at least 2 minutes to walk to the office and 2 more to walk back. I pulled out the AED log that showed the exact timeline, pointing to where it said the device was activated at 2:47 p.m. Just 3 minutes after the first 911 call from the library. The paramedic report said this quick response was critical in preventing permanent brain damage or death, and I handed copies to each committee member who leaned forward to read them. Mom stood up next and unfolded Mr. Garrett's letter with shaking hands. She read his words about owing his life to my quick thinking, how the doctor said another minute would have been too late, and how punishing me would discourage future students from helping in emergencies. Her voice cracked when she got to the part where he wrote about being able to see his grandchildren grow up because of what I did, and she had to pause to wipe her eyes before continuing. When she finished, the committee members started asking questions. The man who'd been frowning asked why I didn't call 911 first, and I explained there wasn't time to wait for paramedics who would take at least 5 minutes to arrive. A woman in glasses asked if I'd considered other options, like sending someone else to run, and I said the freshmen were too scared to move, and I was the only one who knew where the AED was. The red-haired woman asked if I understood the scholarship rules when I made my choice, and I told her yes. I knew exactly what I was risking, but couldn't let Mr. Garrett die. Irene asked what I thought should happen to the policy going forward. I suggested they could create an emergency exception with clear documentation requirements, similar to Good Samaritan laws that protect people who help in medical emergencies. I explained it could require proof, like medical reports and witness statements, to prevent false claims while still allowing students to save lives without losing their futures. After about an hour of questions and discussion, Irene said they needed to deliberate privately and asked us to wait in the hallway. Mom and I went back out to those plastic chairs and she held my hand while we waited. Delaney had been texting with Ted, who was apparently in the parking lot with a bunch of other students waiting to hear what happened. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours sitting in that hallway watching people walk by with their coffee cups and folders while my whole future hung in the balance. Finally, the door opened and the gray-haired woman called us back in. We sat down and Irene stood up with a piece of paper in her hand. Delaney's weekend prep sessions with that giant binder and 6 hours of practice make me wonder if she's done this before with other students. The timing of that reporter calling right before the hearing is curious, too. She announced they decided to retain my scholarship with conditions including 1 semester of probation, a 25% reduction in the monthly stipend, and 40 hours of mandatory safety training service. I felt my whole body go weak with relief and had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling over. Mom started crying and grabbed my arm, squeezing it so tight it hurt, but I didn't care because I still had my scholarship. The committee chair said they were also recommending the school board review the running policy to include emergency exceptions, though she made it clear this wasn't guaranteed to pass and would require its own process. The committee chair walked us to the door, and when I pushed it open, I saw Ted standing there with at least 30 other kids holding this huge banner that said, "Heroes Don't Walk," in red paint. My face got hot seeing all these people who'd been waiting for me, and Ted grabbed my arm, pulling me into this group hug while everyone was cheering and patting my back. Mom started crying again, but happy tears this time, and somebody's parents suggested we all go to Antonio's Pizza to celebrate. The whole crowd walked down the street together, cars honking at us, and when we got to the restaurant, the owner wouldn't let me pay for anything. Kids kept coming up to my table saying they were proud of me, and one girl from my chemistry class said she'd been scared to help her diabetic friend last month because of the running rule. Ted made this toast with his soda about changing bad rules, and everyone raised their cup, even though I wanted to crawl under the table from embarrassment. The next morning, Maya Schmidt showed up at my house with a recorder and a notebook full of questions. She'd already interviewed 3 doctors at the hospital who all said the same thing about response time being critical in cardiac arrest, and she had statistics about how many minutes matter when someone's heart stops. She asked me to walk her through everything from the moment I saw Mr. Garrett collapse, writing down every detail about the timeline and my decision to run. Her questions were smart, asking about other times students hadn't helped because of the rule, and I told her about the seizure incident and the diabetic girl without naming anyone. She took pictures of my scholarship paperwork and the committee's decision letter, saying she wanted readers to understand what I'd risk. When she left, she mentioned the article would run in 2 days and might get picked up by bigger papers. That afternoon, Mr. Luster's secretary called, asking me to come in, and I thought maybe he'd changed his mind about the punishment. Instead, he had this whole plan laid out on his desk for my safety training hours with a schedule for teaching CPR classes to freshmen. He said I'd work with the school nurse to set up training sessions during study halls, and we'd focus on where all the AED machines were located. The way he talked about it actually sounded useful, not like busy work. And he even suggested I could get certified as an instructor, which would look good on college applications. He handed me a binder with training materials and said we'd start next week with the freshman Hill classes. 3 days later, Maya's article came out with with a headline, "Student loses scholarship funds after saving teacher's life," and my phone started blowing up. Parents from all over town were messaging me on social media, some saying I was brave and the rule was stupid, others arguing that rules exist for a reason, and I knew the consequences. The comment section under the online version got nasty fast, with people calling each other names and arguing about lawsuits and safety. One mom wrote this long post about how her son broke his arm when kids were running in hallways, and another parent responded that a broken arm was better than a dead teacher. The school's Facebook page got flooded with angry comments on both sides, and somebody started a petition to fire Mr. Elster, which made me uncomfortable since he was just following policy. By the end of the week, the school board announced they'd added a policy review to next month's agenda after getting hundreds of emails and phone calls. Jean Warren called me personally to say she wanted a student representative at the discussion, and Delaney had already recommended me for the spot. She explained the board would need to hear from all sides, including insurance concerns and legal issues, but she thought my perspective would be valuable. She gave me the date and time, warning me that these meetings could get heated when the community was divided. 2 days later, I had to meet with Wesley Gordon in this tiny office that smelled like old coffee and copy paper. He pulled out this thick folder full of lawsuit documents from other school districts, showing me case after case where kids claimed fake emergencies to justify running. One district had to pay out $2 million when a kid got hurt running to a supposed emergency that turned out to be nothing. He showed me graphs about insurance premiums going up when schools made exceptions to safety rules, and explained how one lawsuit could bankrupt our whole district. He wasn't mean about it, just laying out fact, but I could tell he thought any exception was a bad idea. That night, Ted came over and we started working on a petition for a Good Samaritan exception to the running rule. We wrote specific language about life-threatening emergencies only with requirements for documentation like medical reports and witness statements. Ted set up an online version and a paper one, and we spent the next day walking around school getting signatures. Kids were lining up to sign it, even ones I didn't know, and teachers would give us this look like they wanted to sign, but couldn't. Within 3 days, we had over 500 signatures, plus comments from students sharing their own stories about being afraid to help. The next week, Mr. Garrett came back to work part-time, still looking pale, but walking around and teaching his morning classes. The teachers' union rep showed up that same day talking to staff about workplace safety and how the current policy could delay help if a teacher had another emergency. They sent out this email to all union members about supporting policy change, framing it as protecting staff, not just students. Mr. Garrett told me later that most teachers supported changing the rule, but were afraid to say so publicly. I started my safety training service the following Monday, teaching a group of nervous freshmen about AED locations and basic CPR. The nurse had me demonstrate on the practice dummy while she explained the step, and I could see kids actually paying attention instead of goofing off like usual. One boy asked what would happen if he ran to get an AED, and I had to tell him he'd get punished under current rules, which made the whole class go quiet. After the session, 3 kids thanked me for teaching them, saying they felt more prepared if something bad happened. We did 4 more sessions that week, and word got around that the training was actually helpful. But 2 weeks before the board meeting, things got ugly when a group of parents organized their own campaign against any rule changes. One dad wrote this op-ed in the paper about slippery slopes and how making exceptions would lead to chaos in the hallway. He claimed kids would fake emergencies to run whenever they wanted, and that I should have accepted my punishment without complaining. His letter sparked a bunch of responses, both supporting and attacking him, and suddenly everyone at the school was picking sides. Kids were arguing in the cafeteria about whether I was a hero or a rule breaker, and 2 boys almost got in a fight when one called me stupid for losing my scholarship money. Delaney called me that weekend and said we needed to get serious about preparing for the board meeting. So I spent Saturday afternoon in her office going through every possible question they might throw at me. She had this stack of index cards with hostile questions written on them and made me answer each one without getting defensive or emotional. Ted showed up halfway through a pizza and started playing the role of an angry parent, asking stuff like why I thought I was special and whether I'd run again if another emergency happened. He was so good at being a jerk that I actually got mad at him for a second before remembering we were just practicing. We went through my presentation slides 20 times, cutting out anything that sounded whiny or like I was making excuses, focusing only on facts about response times and the need for clear emergency guidelines. Delaney made me practice standing up straight and speaking clearly without rushing my words. And Ted timed me to make sure I stayed under the 5-minute limit the board had given me. Sunday afternoon, Mr. Garrett called and said he wanted to speak at the meeting even though his doctor told him to avoid stress for at least another month. I could hear his wife in the background telling him he was being stubborn and needed to rest, but he kept saying this was too important and he owed it to future students to be there. He asked me to email him the proposal so he could prepare his own remark, and I could tell from his voice that he wasn't going to let anyone talk him out of it. During the week before the meeting, 3 different teachers pulled me aside in empty classrooms to tell me about times when students had to walk for help during emergencies. One math teacher described how a kid had a seizure in her class and everyone just stood there for 30 seconds before someone finally started walking to the nurse. And by the time help arrived, the kid had been seizing for almost 4 minutes. Another teacher told me about a diabetic student who passed out and how kids were afraid to run for the glucose gel in the office because they'd seen what happened to me. The committee giving her back the scholarship at cutting 25% and adding 40 hours of work makes me curious about their real reasoning. Did they actually think she was wrong or just need to look tough while secretly agreeing with her actions? The third story was about a kid who cut his hand badly in shot class and bled all over the floor while his friend walked to get help, leaving a trail of blood drops all the way to the office. 2 days before the meeting, Jean Warren asked me to come to her office at the district building to go over the proposal one more time. She had this huge conference table covered with papers about insurance policies and legal stuff, and she walked me through which board members were likely to support us and which ones were worried about liability. She said 3 members were solid no votes because of insurance concerns. 2 were leaning yes and 2 were on the fence, which meant we needed to convince at least 1 fence sitter to get the 4 votes we needed. She warned me that the opposition had organized parents to speak against any changes and that things might get heated, but I should stay calm and stick to the facts no matter what people say. said. The night of the meeting arrived and the parking lot was already full when we got there an hour early. The meeting room had maybe 200 seats and people were already claiming spots with news cameras setting up in the back corner and reporters interviewing parents in the hallway. My hands were sweating so bad I had to keep wiping them on my pants, and Ted kept telling me to breathe while my mom checked my appearance for the 10th time. The room filled up fast with parents holding signs both for and against the rule change. Teachers trying to look neutral in the middle rows and students packed along the walls since all the seats were taken. When the board members walked in and took their places at the long table up front, everyone got quiet except for the clicking of camera shutters and the hum of the air conditioning working overtime with so many bodies in the room. Jean Warren called the meeting to order and explained that they'd hear from opponents first, then supporters, with each person getting 3 minutes to speak. The first parent up was this dad in a suit who argued that any exception would be abused by students who just wanted to run in the halls, and he kept using the phrase slippery slope like it was some kind of magic spell. Another parent claimed that calling 911 was always enough and that students shouldn't be playing hero, which made some people in the crowd actually boo until Jean warned them about disrupting the meeting. A woman with a clipboard read statistics about hallway injuries at schools without strict policies, and one man talked about his nephew who got trampled at another school during a fake emergency. By the time the opponents finished, they'd painted a picture of total chaos if even the smallest exception was made, and I could see 2 board members nodding along with their argument. When Jean called my name, my legs felt like jelly walking to the podium, but I forced myself to look at the board members instead of the crowd. I pulled up my slides on the screen and presented our proposal for clear emergency exceptions with strict documentation requirements, showing data about how every minute matters in cardiac arrest and how our current response time for walking to get help was too slow for real emergency. I shared the 3 teacher stories without naming anyone, explaining how fear of punishment was making students hesitate when seconds counted, and I showed examples from other districts that had successfully implemented similar policies without problem. I finished by saying that rules meant to protect students shouldn't prevent students from protecting each other, and that we could create guidelines that preserved safety while allowing life-saving action. Mr. Garrett came up next, still looking pale and moving slowly, but his voice was strong when he spoke about owing his life to quick action and how policy should protect people, not paperwork. He looked directly at each board member and said that if another teacher collapsed tomorrow, he wanted students to feel free to run for help without worrying about their futures, and that the current policy valued rules over lives. The board debated for over an hour with Wesley Gordon explaining different insurance options if they required training and documentation, and 2 members arguing this could be a model for other districts dealing with the same issues. One member kept asking about liability if someone got hurt running during a false emergency, while another pointed out that the current policy created its own liability if someone died because help was delayed. Finally, Jean called for the vote and my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it as each member said yes or no, with the final count coming to 4 in favor and 3 against, approving a pilot emergency exception program with mandatory training and strict documentation requirements. People started getting up from their seats and Mr. Garrett walked straight over to me with his hand out, gripping mine firmly when I shook it, while his wife wrapped her arms around me in this tight hug that made my ribs hurt. The crowd was breaking up into little groups talking about what just happened, and I could hear parents arguing about whether this was good or bad, while Ted was already texting everyone about the vote result. Mr. Garrett told me I'd done something bigger than just saving his life, and his wife kept squeezing my shoulder while reporters tried to get quotes from board members who were packing up their papers. The next few weeks flew by with meetings and conference rooms where Delaney spread out binders full of medical response protocols, while Wesley typed notes on his laptop about liability coverage and documentation form. We spent hours going through different emergency scenarios like seizures and allergic reactions and choking, and figuring out exactly when running would be allowed and what proof students would need to show afterward. Wesley kept bringing up edge cases like panic attack that looked like heart attacks or students faking emergencies to run in the halls, and we had to write specific rules for each situation. I sat there with a yellow highlighter marking up draft after draft while Delaney drew flowcharts on the whiteboard showing decision trees for different emergencies. The training videos took forever to film because Wesley wanted to show exactly how to fill out the incident reports and where to find the emergency equipment in each building. We had to reshoot the AED demonstration 3 times because the first version didn't show the pad placement clearly enough and the second one had bad audio. By December, my scholarship probation officially ended and the full amount showed up in my account again. But I kept my job at the hardware store anyway because I'd gotten used to having backup money. The manager let me adjust my hours around school, and I actually liked learning about different tools and helping customers figure out what they needed for project. Maya came by the school in January to interview students who'd completed the new training program, and she took photos of kids practicing CPR on the dummies we'd gotten donated. She talked to 3 different districts that called our principal asking for copies of our emergency exception policy and training materials because they were dealing with similar problems. The article ran on the front page with a photo of me teaching a group of freshmen how to use the AED and quotes from other schools saying they were watching our pilot program closely. I got invited to speak at this education conference downtown where I stood in front of 200 administrators explaining how we balance safety with common sense. Spring semester felt different with kids actually knowing what to do in emergencies instead of just standing around scared, and we'd had 2 real situations where students used the training properly. One kid had a severe asthma attack in the gym and another student ran for his inhaler from the nurse's office without worrying about getting in trouble. During the big assembly in April, Mr. Elster stood at the podium with charts showing that over 200 students had completed the emergency response certification and that we'd had 0 false alarms or policy abuse. He actually admitted that the new system made the school safer because students could respond quickly when seconds mattered while still maintaining order during normal time. Ted pulled me aside after the assembly to tell me he was running for student body president next year with a whole platform about fixing other dumb policies and wanted me to run his campaign. We spent that afternoon making lists of rules that needed changing, like the one about bathroom passes during standardized testing and the policy about eating in the library, even with the doors closed. Mr. Garrett came back to teaching full-time after spring break and immediately started this advocacy club that met every Tuesday to identify policies that hurt more than they help. He'd stand at the front of his classroom joking that I'd saved him twice, once with the defibrillator and once by fixing the rule that almost let him die. The club grew to 30 members by May, and we'd already gotten 2 policy changes through the board, including one about letting diabetic students carry glucose tablets without a doctor's note. Graduation day arrived hot and humid with everyone sweating under their robe. While we waited in alphabetical order to walk across the stage, the principal had asked me to give one of the short student speeches, and I stood at the podium looking out at all these faces I'd spent 4 years with. I talked about how sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules, but that real courage comes from staying to fix the broken system instead of just walking away. I kept it short because nobody wants to sit through long speeches in that heat, but I made sure to say that changing bad rules was how we protected future students from impossible choices. After the ceremony, Mr. Garrett found me in the crowd of families taking pictures and shook my hand again, saying he was proud of everything I'd accomplished. Ted was already making plans for next year's student government campaign and talking about the policy handbook he'd downloaded to study over the summer. My parents took about 1 million photos while my scholarship certificate felt heavy in my hands, knowing how close I'd come to losing it all. Well folks, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks for sticking with me through all my questions and wondering. It's been fun exploring these moments together until we cross paths again. And hey, subscribe for more content like
and subscribe for more videos like these. Thanks for watching.